Are they on?
Yep.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Natalie Shane,
And I'm Brooke Scarborough.
and tonight we're going to teach you guys a little bit about the legal history of career and technical education, and most of that's in legislation form. So this is basically what we're going to break down into. We're hitting some of the main points with the legal history of career and technical education, but I mean there's a lot more than what we have up here, but there's not enough time to explain all of this. Some learning objectives.
So we want to understand the basic legal history of career technical education, starting way back in the 1900s all the way through today, because the legislation has really shaped the field in many ways. And then also know when it was enacted and aware of legislation currently in Congress, because it is still an issue that affects students today.
Okay, so we're going to start off with a little bit of an activity. So if you want to group up into like pairs or groups and just talk about what you think you know about the legal history of career and technical education. We'll give you a few minutes and then we'll group back.
I'm going to sit here. On a much pad. There's some tech schools and careers. Maybe there's something to do with like the
Okay, so I guess we're gonna. So what did you guys all come up with?
we don't know anything.
Yeah. Nothing? Okay then. Guess we have a lot to learn.
Well, a lot of what we're going to talk about is what the first group talked about, so you probably know a little bit more than you might think. This is going to be a little repetitive, starting with the Smith-Hughes Act, which I know that the last group touched on. But like they said, it started with agricultural times. That's when the first vocational education started out. Back way even in like the 1800s, 1700s, apprenticeships were popular. But federal funding for vocational education didn't start until 1917 with the Smith-Hughes Act, and that legislation also separated traditional education from what was then called vocational education. So teachers received different training from traditional students. The curriculum was separate, so the government recognized that students in vocational schools had a different curriculum than students in traditional schools. And that was way back in 1917. Ohio was a big part of this because they received $2.5 million, which back in 1917 went a little bit further than it might today. So it is a big part of our history.
There were a few bills between then and 1963. A lot of them, 1945, 46 was a big one, and there were a few others in between. But 1963, the Vocational Education Act, that's a huge one for the more contemporary times of career and technical education. It like really defined what vocational education was at that point, and it was really broad. It was basically anything you didn't have, like anything that prepared you for the workforce that wasn't considered a profession. So like medicine and that kind of those kinds of things weren't really considered at that point. It also defined eligible persons, services and activities that the funding could be used for, and how the funds were distributed. It was amended in 1968, which allowed more of the population to be prepared for the workforce.
And then the Carl D. Perkins Vocational Education Act is one that many of us have probably heard of. It's talked about a lot in regards to career technical education. It set aside 57% of federal grants to help disadvantaged students, and as a result, the percentage of disadvantaged students enrolled in vocational education increased a lot during the 1980s and the 1990s. But there were some problems with it in the minds of just like other people. They thought that the students maybe weren't being prepared for college as much when they went to these vocational schools. So that led to the Carl Perkins Acts of 1990 and 1998, which placed a greater focus on academic rigor, making sure that these classes were really challenging the students so that they were prepared, if they wanted to go on to college when they graduated. It also improved the programs, added some standards, and some of the set-asides that had been added during the 1960s were reduced a little bit, and states were required to provide data on key performance indicators just to track the performance of the vocational schools.
Okay, so most recently, the Carl D. Perkins Acts have been amended in 2006. That's the most current amendment, and it was amended to the Carl D. Perkins Career and Technical Education Act of 2006. A lot of people call it Perkins Act, Perkins Funding, Perkins 4. There's like 7 different names, but they're all referring to the same one at this point, and it distributes funding 15% to the state departments and 85% to school districts and post-secondary institutions. Now, there are 9 required uses for both state and local activities, and then permissible uses, which kind of eliminate the gray areas that we weren't really sure if we could use funding for that or not. There's 17 for state activities and 20 for local activities. It covers, and that's the last it's been amended. It was up for renewal in 2012, but at this time, there hasn't been a renewal. But currently, in the United States Senate is Senate Bill 191, the Educating Tomorrow's Workforce Act of 2015. It was introduced on January 20th of this year. It was read twice and referred to the Senate Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions. It was sponsored by a senator out of Virginia, and one of our own Ohio senators is actually one of our co-sponsors, which I find really interesting because it also affects Ohio greatly because we have such a strong population with career and technical education. States then would be required to ensure the quality of their programs, and that can be through certificates or credentials and licenses. And I know Family and Consumer Sciences education right now is really big on providing credentials with the most recent standards updates, which provides either ServSafe training in your foods classes or OSHA certifications in career classes. So, let's break back into our groups and talk amongst yourself for a few moments and talk about what you guys learned, and we'll group back up.
And then just some of the legislature, if you remember, about what was important about it, things like that.
Definitely a lot more
Does anyone want to share one that I thought was particularly interesting?
I mean, the Perkins Act is clearly a big one for the EV side and stuff.
What can someone tell me about the Smithies Act? Amanda?
There's a lot.
What about
1917.
Yeah. What about the Vocational Education Act? Can anyone tell us anything on that?
The 1963?
Yeah. And then, how many Perkins Acts have there been?
4?
Very good. And then, currently, where is a current legislation sitting?
For Ohio, I don't know.
Colleen, who's one of the co-sponsors.
That,
Round 40.